In the marble corridors of Mallory Industries, 32 floors above the bustling streets of New Avalon, a desperate billionaire pulled his secretary into his arms and kissed her. Not for love, not for passion, but for freedom. This wasn't a romantic movie moment. This was an act of rebellion. A final, reckless gamble by a man who had everything money could buy, except the one thing he wanted most, the right to choose his own life. What happened when that fake kiss turned into something real? How did one moment of desperation destroy two of the most powerful families in America? And why did the woman who was supposed to save him nearly become his greatest betrayal? If you've ever felt trapped by other people's expectations, stuck in a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels like a cage, then you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now if you're ready for a tale that will change how you think about love, courage, and the price of true freedom. Meet Dorian Mallory. At 31, he commanded a business empire worth $12 billion. His face graced magazine covers. Presidents took his calls. He owned penthouses in 3 countries and a yacht that cost more than most people's homes. But money can't buy you out of every trap. For generations, the Mallory family had built their fortune on strategic marriages. Unions designed to merge empires, not hearts. Dorian's own father had married for alliance. His grandfather before him had done the same. It was tradition. It was business. It was expected. And now it was Dorian's turn. Have you ever had someone else map out your entire future without asking what you wanted? Have you ever sat in a room full of people making decisions about your life while you felt completely powerless to stop them? That was Dorian's reality every single day. The woman chosen for him was Celeste Vance, daughter of shipping magnate Carlton Vance. On paper, she was perfect, beautiful, educated, from the right family. Their union would create the largest privately held conglomerate on the East Coast. The contracts were drawn. The engagement party was planned. The future was set in stone. But Dorian had a secret that would shock everyone who knew him as the confident, untouchable billionaire. He'd grown up poor. Scholarship kid from the wrong side of town who'd clawed his way to the top through sheer determination and brilliant business instincts. The polished exterior was carefully constructed. The real Dorian, the one who remembered sleeping on friends' couches and working 3 jobs to pay for college, that man was suffocating under the weight of family expectations. Then Anya Collins walked into his office. She wasn't supposed to change anything. She was hired as his executive secretary, efficient, professional, temporary. Just another employee in his massive corporate machine. But from the moment she looked him in the eye during that first interview, something shifted. Anya came from the world Dorian had left behind. Her parents were working artists who'd taught her that integrity mattered more than income. She'd worked her way through college, waited tables, tutored students, survived on ramen noodles and hope. When she spoke, there was no agenda hidden behind her words. When she laughed, it was genuine. When she challenged his ideas, which she did respectfully but fearlessly, it was because she actually cared about the work, not because she was trying to impress him. Do you know someone like that? Someone who sees right through the mask you wear for the world and connects with who you really are underneath? That's dangerous territory, especially when your life is already planned out by other people. For weeks, Dorian found himself staying late at the office, not because of urgent business deals, but because talking to Anya felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. She made him remember who he'd been before the money and power reshaped him. She made him want to be that person again. But here's what makes this story truly explosive. Anya wasn't just a random secretary who happened to change his life. She had secrets of her own. She'd been placed there deliberately, part of a plan that reached into the very heart of the Mallory family dynamics. The wedding was 2 days away. The contracts were ready for signing. Celeste was planning their honeymoon. Dorian's father was already celebrating the alliance that would secure their family's dominance for another generation. And that's when everything exploded. Let me take you inside the world where this story unfolds. A place where power is currency, appearances are everything, and one wrong move can destroy generations of carefully built influence. New Avalon wasn't just another city. It was where America's elite came to play their highest-stakes games. Glass towers stretched toward the clouds, each one housing boardrooms where billion-dollar deals were made with handshakes and where family names carried more weight than actual ability. The streets below buzzed with ambition, but the real action happened in private clubs, exclusive galas, and behind closed doors where the truly powerful shaped the world according to their wishes. Dorian Mallory ruled this domain from the 52nd floor of the Mallory Industries headquarters. His corner office overlooked the harbor, a constant reminder of how far he'd climbed from those childhood nights when he'd fallen asleep to the sound of police sirens instead of yacht horns. But success in this world came with a price that few understood until it was too late. The Mallory name meant something. For 4 generations, they had built their empire not just through smart business decisions, but through strategic marriages that consolidated power. Dorian's great-grandfather had married into the railroad fortune that gave them their first real foothold. His grandfather had chosen a bride whose family controlled the largest shipping ports on the East Coast. His father, Everett, had sealed an alliance with the banking dynasty that provided the capital for their expansion into technology and energy. Each generation had sacrificed personal desire for family advancement. Each had accepted that love was a luxury they couldn't afford. Now the family expected Dorian to continue this tradition. But Dorian was different from his ancestors in ways that went far beyond his humble beginnings. He'd built his own fortune before inheriting the family business. He'd proven himself in boardrooms where his last name meant nothing and his ideas meant everything. He'd earned respect through innovation, not just inheritance. That independence had made him valuable to the family business and dangerous to their control. Think about your own family dynamics for a moment. Do you have relatives who expect you to follow a path they've mapped out, regardless of what makes you happy? Have you ever felt the crushing weight of generational expectations, where disappointing your family feels like betraying everyone who came before you? That pressure was Dorian's daily reality, multiplied by billions of dollars and centuries of tradition. Everett Mallory was a man accustomed to getting his way. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and possessing the kind of quiet authority that made senators nervous, he'd built his reputation on never accepting no for an answer. He'd arranged Dorian's engagement to Celeste Vance the same way he'd negotiate any other business deal, with calculated precision and absolute certainty that his terms would be accepted. Celeste herself was everything the Mallory family could want in a daughter-in-law. At 28, she had graduated from the right schools, moved in the right circles, and understood exactly how marriages worked in their world. Beautiful in the polished way that came from personal trainers, expert stylists, and a lifetime of knowing she was being groomed for exactly this kind of alliance. She was intelligent, articulate, and completely committed to the idea that love was secondary to success. Her conversations with Dorian felt like chess matches. Every word was calculated. Every smile was strategic. She never challenged his ideas, but she never genuinely engaged with them either. She was perfect for the role of Billionaire's wife, but terrible for the role of Dorian's partner. Into this world of calculated relationships and strategic alliances walked Anya Collins, carrying herself with a confidence that didn't come from wealth or status, but from something much rarer, authenticity. Anya's resume was impressive, but not overwhelming. Business degree from a state university, not an Ivy League school. Previous experience managing operations for a mid-sized consulting firm, not a Fortune 500 corporation. What caught Dorian's attention during her interview wasn't her credentials, it was her directness. When he'd asked her why she wanted the position, she'd looked him straight in the eye and said, "Because I'm excellent at what I do, and I think you need someone who will tell you the truth instead of what you want to hear." Most candidates spent their interviews trying to impress him. Anya spent hers evaluating whether he was worth her time. Her background was the complete opposite of everyone in Dorian's current circle. Daughter of a photographer and a sculpture artist who'd chosen passion over profit at every turn. She'd grown up in a house where dinner table conversations focused on books and ideas rather than stock prices and business acquisitions. Where success was measured by personal fulfillment rather than net worth. She'd worked her way through college, juggling multiple jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. She'd turned down offers from larger corporations because she wanted to work somewhere that aligned with her values, not just her bank account. She read voraciously, had opinions about everything from foreign policy to modern literature, and wasn't afraid to express them. But Anya had secrets that would complicate everything. She wasn't just another qualified candidate who'd responded to a job posting. She'd been specifically recommended for the position by someone with intimate knowledge of the Mallory family dynamics. Someone who understood that Dorian needed an ally more than he needed another employee. That someone was his own sister, Simone. Simone Mallory had been the family's first rebel, and she'd paid the price for it. 5 years older than Dorian, she'd walked away from her own arranged engagement at 25, choosing love over loyalty to the family empire. The man she'd chosen was a brilliant pediatric surgeon who came from a middle-class family. Exactly the kind of person the Mallorys considered beneath their station. Her father had given her an ultimatum: end the relationship or be cut off completely. Simone had chosen love and lost everything else. Now living quietly as Dr. Simone Ashford, she practiced family law and had built a life filled with genuine happiness rather than inherited wealth. But she'd never stopped watching her family from the outside, never stopped worrying about the brother she'd left behind in that golden cage. When she learned about Dorian's engagement to Celeste, she knew history was repeating itself. Except this time, she wasn't going to stand by and watch her brother sacrifice his soul for the family's ambitions. That's why she'd carefully researched and recommended Anya Collins for the secretary position. Not as a saboteur, but as a lifeline. Someone who could remind Dorian that there were other ways to live, other definitions of success, other possibilities for his future. What Simone hadn't anticipated was how quickly and deeply her plan would work. As weeks passed, the dynamic between Dorian and Anya evolved in ways that surprised them both. What started as professional respect grew into genuine friendship, and friendship was blossoming into something more dangerous: real connection. Their conversations lasted long after business hours ended. Anya would stay behind, ostensibly to finish reports or organize files, but really because she and Dorian had discovered they could talk about everything: books, politics, philosophy, dreams they'd never shared with anyone else. Have you ever met someone who challenges the way you see the world? Someone whose perspective is so different from yours that every conversation feels like discovering a new part of yourself? That's what was happening between them, and it was terrifying for a man whose entire life had been planned by other people. Anya didn't treat him like a billionaire. She treated him like Dorian, the scholarship kid who'd read every book in his local library, who still remembered being hungry, who'd worked construction jobs during summer breaks to help pay for college. She saw through the expensive suits and polished boardroom persona to the man underneath, who was desperately trying not to lose himself completely. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations accelerated with military precision. Everett Mallory had hired the most exclusive event planner in the city. The guest list included 2 senators, a Supreme Court justice, and the CEOs of half the Fortune 500. The venue was booked, the flowers ordered, the menu selected. Every detail was designed to showcase the power and prestige of the alliance between the Mallory and Vance families. Dorian attended planning meetings like a condemned man going through the motions. He nodded at fabric samples, approved menu selections, and pretended to care about whether the centerpieces should feature white roses or white orchids. Inside, he felt like he was slowly disappearing, becoming just another chess piece in his father's grand strategy. The worst part was his interactions with Celeste herself. She approached their impending marriage with the enthusiasm of someone reviewing a quarterly business report. During their required dinner dates, she discussed their future with clinical detachment: which charities they'd support, which social events they'd attend, how they'd divide their time between his penthouse and her family's estate. When he'd tried to ask about her dreams, her passions, what made her happy, she'd looked at him with genuine confusion. "I don't understand the question," she'd said. "We'll be happy because we'll be successful. What else matters?" Those words haunted him because he realized that for most of his adult life, he'd been asking himself the same question. What else mattered besides success? Before Anya, he might not have had an answer. But now he was discovering what else mattered: authentic conversation, shared laughter, the feeling of being truly understood by another person. The simple pleasure of working alongside someone who challenged him to be better rather than just more profitable. The pressure from his family intensified daily. Everett had always been formidable, but as the wedding approached, he became relentless. Every conversation turned into a lecture about duty, responsibility, and the sacrifices required to maintain the family's position. "You think you're special because you built your own company first?" he'd said during one particularly heated discussion. "That just proves you understand what it takes to succeed. Now do what's necessary for the family." Have you ever been in a situation where someone you love is pushing you towards something that feels completely wrong for your life? Where they're so convinced they know what's best for you that they can't hear your objections? The frustration was eating away at Dorian's resolve, making him question whether he had the courage to stand up to expectations that went back generations. The breaking point came during a family dinner exactly 1 week before the wedding. Celeste was there, discussing honeymoon plans with Dorian's mother while he sat silent, feeling like a spectator at his own life. His father dominated the conversation with talk of business integration, shared assets, and the political connections their union would create. "The Vance shipping contracts alone will increase our quarterly revenue by 15%, Everett was saying, gesturing with his wine glass. "And that's before we factor in their political influence. Senator Vance has already promised his support for the infrastructure bill that will benefit our energy sector." Dorian realized they were discussing his marriage like a merger, because to them, that's exactly what it was. His feelings, his happiness, his actual compatibility with Celeste, none of that entered into their calculations. That night, unable to sleep, he found himself back at the office at midnight, staring out at the city lights and trying to figure out how he'd ended up in this position. That's when Anya appeared in the doorway. "I saw your light on from the parking garage," she said quietly. "Rough night." For the first time in months, Dorian told the complete truth to another person. He talked about the suffocating expectations, the weight of family tradition, the feeling that he was about to sign away his soul along with the marriage contract. Anya listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and offering perspectives he'd never considered. She didn't tell him what to do, but she helped him understand what he was really choosing between security versus authenticity, family approval versus personal happiness, the path of least resistance versus the courage to forge his own way. "You know what scares me most?" Dorian admitted as dawn began to break over the city. "I'm afraid that if I go through with this, I'll become the kind of person who thinks this is normal. That I'll forget there's any other way to live." Anya looked at him with those steady, honest eyes that had been haunting his thoughts. "Then don't let that happen." It was simple advice, but it hit him like a revelation. He didn't have to let it happen. He had a choice, even if everyone around him was pretending he didn't. The wedding was 6 days away. 3 days before the wedding, Dorian's world began collapsing in slow motion. The morning started with a call from his wedding planner, confirming final details with the enthusiasm of someone who had no idea she was organizing what felt like a funeral. The afternoon brought a parade of family members stopping by his office to offer congratulations that sounded more like condolences. His cousin Marcus actually patted his shoulder and said, "Don't worry, cousin. Marriage isn't about happiness. It's about building something bigger than yourself." By evening, Dorian felt like he was drowning in other people's certainty about his future. The marriage contract sat on his desk, 47 pages of legal language that would bind him to Celeste and merge their families' empires. His father expected him to sign it the next morning, making the engagement official and the wedding inevitable. Every clause had been negotiated, every detail planned, every escape route sealed. Except Dorian hadn't signed it yet. He'd been staring at those pages for hours, pen in hand, when Anya knocked on his door at nearly 9 o'clock. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, carrying a folder of documents that probably could have waited until morning. "I know you wanted these expense reports reviewed before tomorrow's board meeting." They both knew the reports weren't urgent. They both knew she was checking on him. "Come in," he said, grateful for any distraction from the contract that was waiting to seal his fate. Anya set the folder on his desk and noticed the marriage documents immediately. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, concern, sadness, maybe something deeper. "Big decision?" she asked quietly. Dorian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You could say that. 47 pages of my future, written by lawyers and approved by people who think they know what's best for me. And what do you think is best for you?" It was such a simple question, but no one had asked him that in months. Everyone had opinions about what he should do, what he owed his family, what was expected of him. But no one had asked what he actually wanted. Have you ever been in a moment where someone asks you exactly the question you've been afraid to ask yourself? Where suddenly you realize that all the noise in your head stops, and there's just this one clear truth you can't ignore anymore. "I think," Dorian said slowly, "that I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life. And everyone I'm supposed to trust is encouraging me to do it." Anya moved closer, not just physically but emotionally. The professional distance she usually maintained seemed to dissolve. "What would happen if you didn't sign it?" "My father would disown me. The business alliance would collapse. 2 families' worth of expectations would be destroyed. The media would have a field day. Celeste would be humiliated. The wedding guests would be left with a very expensive party and no groom." "That's what would happen to everyone else," Anya said. "What would happen to you?" The question hit him like a physical blow. For the first time in months, someone was asking about his well-being instead of his obligations. I don't know, he admitted. I've been so focused on what I'm supposed to do that I stopped thinking about what I want to do. Maybe that's where you should start. Dorian looked at her. Really looked at her. Anya standing there in his office at 9 o'clock at night, having stayed late not because her job required it, but because she cared about him as a person. Anya, who challenged his ideas during meetings, who laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, who treated him like Dorian instead of like the Mallory heir. What if I told you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, that the only time I've felt like myself in the last 6 months is when I'm talking to you? Something shifted in the air between them. The careful professional boundaries they'd maintained suddenly felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. What if I told you, Anya replied, matching his quiet tone, that I took this job thinking it would be temporary, but I can't bear the thought of leaving. They were standing closer now, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something light and honest, nothing like the heavy, expensive fragrances worn by the women in his usual social circle. Anya, he started, but she interrupted him. You asked what would happen if you didn't sign that contract. Let me ask you something else. What happens if you do sign it? What happens to the man I've gotten to know over these past few months? What happens to the person who still gets excited about innovative business ideas, who cares about his employees, who remembers what it was like to struggle? Her words cut straight through all his rationalizations and excuses. She was asking about the cost of surrender, the price of giving up his authentic self for family approval. Sometimes I just want to run, he said, the confession torn from somewhere deep inside him. To walk away from all of this, the expectations, the pressure, the role I'm supposed to play. Sometimes I want to go somewhere no one knows my last name and start over. Maybe you don't have to run, Anya said softly. Maybe you just have to stop playing by their rules. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Stop playing by their rules. Such simple advice, but it felt revolutionary. Dorian realized he was at a crossroads that had nothing to do with business mergers or family obligations. This was about who he was going to be for the rest of his life. The dutiful son who sacrificed his happiness for other people's plans, or the man who had the courage to choose his own path. What if I mess everything up, he asked. What if you don't? Have you ever had a moment where someone believes in you more than you believe in yourself? Where their confidence in your strength gives you permission to be brave? Looking at Anya in that moment, Dorian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the resigned acceptance of his predetermined future, but actual hope for something different, something real, something chosen rather than imposed. He took a step closer to her. She didn't step back. Anya, if I do this, if I walk away from everything my family expects, I need to know it's for the right reasons. I need to know I'm not just running from something, but running towards something worth the risk. What would be worth the risk? The question made him realize that she was standing right there. The answer to what was worth the risk was standing 3 feet away from him, looking at him with eyes that saw who he really was underneath all the wealth and expectations. You, he said simply. This. Whatever this is between us. Dorian. But he was done with careful words and professional boundaries. Done with making decisions based on what other people wanted. For the first time in months, he was about to do something just because it felt right. He reached for her, his hands framing her face, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up at him with an expression that was equal parts surprise and invitation. What are you doing? She whispered. Something I should have done weeks ago, he said. Something real. And he kissed her. Not the desperate, fake kiss he'd imagined using to escape his engagement party. This was something else entirely, honest, passionate, full of all the feelings he'd been denying for months. It was a kiss that said goodbye to the life he was supposed to live and hello to the possibility of choosing his own happiness. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, the marriage contract was still sitting on his desk. But everything else had changed. The next morning brought reality crashing back with the force of a freight train. Dorian arrived at the office early, hoping to catch Anya before the day officially began, but she was already at her desk, typing with the focused intensity of someone trying very hard to appear normal. When he approached, she looked up with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good morning, Mr. Mallory. Your father called twice already. He wants to meet at 10 to finalize the contract signing. The formal tone hit him like a slap. After last night's honesty and intimacy, hearing her call him Mr. Mallory felt like she was building walls between them. Anya, about last night. I have the quarterly reports you requested, she interrupted, handing him a folder without making eye contact. And Celeste called. She wants to confirm the rehearsal dinner seating arrangements. The message was clear. They were back to being boss and secretary, as if that kiss had never happened. As if the moment when everything changed was just a dream. But Dorian could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was gripping her pen too tightly, the careful distance she was maintaining between them. She was working just as hard as he was to pretend their world hadn't shifted on its axis. Have you ever had a moment with someone that felt life-changing, only to wake up the next day wondering if you imagined the whole thing? Have you ever experienced that crushing disappointment when reality sets in and the magic of the night before seems to evaporate in daylight? Throughout the morning, they maintained the charade of normalcy. Anya brought him coffee at exactly the time she always did. She reminded him of his appointments with the same professional efficiency she'd always shown. She answered his phone with the polished greeting she'd perfected over months of working together. But everything was different now, and they both knew it. The stolen glances across the office carried new weight. When she leaned over his desk to point out something in a report, he could smell her shampoo and remember how she'd felt in his arms. When their hands accidentally touched as she passed him documents, both of them pulled back as if they'd been burned. Other people began to notice. Marcus, his cousin and the company's head of legal affairs, stopped by mid-morning and raised an eyebrow at the tension crackling between Dorian and Anya. "Everything all right in here?" he asked with the knowing smirk of someone who'd grown up watching family drama unfold. "You both look like you've seen a ghost." "Just wedding stress," Dorian replied quickly, hoping his voice sounded more convincing than it felt. But Marcus was a lawyer. Reading people was his specialty. His eyes flicked between Dorian and Anya with newfound interest, the kind of calculating attention that made Dorian's stomach clench with warning. The morning's torture was interrupted by his father's arrival at precisely 10 o'clock. Everett Mallory swept into the office like a conquering general, carrying the marriage contract and an expensive pen that had been used to sign every major Mallory family agreement for 3 generations. "Time to make this official," Everett announced, spreading the documents across Dorian's desk with ceremonial gravity. "The Vances are expecting the signed contract by noon. After that, there's no backing out." Anya excused herself from the office, but not before Dorian caught the flash of something in her expression. Pain, maybe, or fear. She disappeared behind her desk, but he could feel her presence like a magnetic pull, even with his father demanding his attention. Everett began reviewing the contract terms with the enthusiasm of someone discussing a particularly profitable stock acquisition. Joint assets, shared business ventures, clauses about children and inheritance. Dorian's entire future mapped out in legal language. "Sign here," his father said, pointing to a line at the bottom of page 47. "And here. An initial here." Dorian picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the expectations of generations. This was the moment of no return, the point where he stopped being Dorian and became just another link in the Mallory family chain. He looked through the glass wall of his office and saw Anya at her desk, pretending to work but clearly listening to every word. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in that instant, he saw everything he'd be giving up if he signed those papers. But before he could make a decision either way, his father's phone rang with urgent news that would complicate everything. "What do you mean missing?" Everett barked into the phone, his face darkening with anger. "How does a shipment worth $50 million just disappear?" The crisis demanded immediate attention, and the contract signing was postponed while Everett rushed off to handle what sounded like either a massive theft or a catastrophic logistical failure. Left alone, Dorian and Anya finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding all morning. "We need to talk," he said, closing his office door for privacy. "I know," she replied, but she looked terrified of whatever was about to be said. They stood on opposite sides of his desk, the marriage contract spread between them like a physical representation of all the obstacles in their path. "Last night," Dorian began, "was a mistake," Anya finished quickly. "I never should have let it happen. You're getting married in 2 days. I work for you. This is exactly the kind of situation that destroys careers and ruins lives. What if I don't want to get married in 2 days?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and terror. "Don't say that," Anya whispered. "Don't say things you don't mean just because you're scared of signing that contract." "I'm not scared of the contract," Dorian said, moving around the desk toward her. "I'm scared of what happens if I sign it. I'm scared of becoming the kind of person who thinks power and money are more important than actual happiness. And I'm scared, Anya said, backing away from him, that you're about to make a decision that will destroy your family relationships forever, and you'll end up blaming me for it. Is that what this is about? You think I'd regret choosing you over them? I think, Anya said, her voice breaking slightly, that you don't know me well enough to make that choice. The words stopped Dorian cold. What do you mean? This was the moment Anya had been dreading since she'd accepted the position months ago. The moment when all her secrets would be exposed and Dorian would learn that their entire relationship had been built on a foundation of deception. I need to tell you something, she said, sinking into the chair across from his desk as if her legs wouldn't support her anymore. Something I should have told you weeks ago. What is it? I didn't apply for this job randomly. I was specifically recommended for it by someone who knew the Mallory family situation very well. Dorian's expression shifted from confusion to growing alarm. Recommended by whom? Your sister, Simone. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Simone? You've been in contact with Simone this whole time. She reached out to me through professional contacts. She was looking for someone who could work closely with you during this engagement period. Someone who might help you see that you had other options. Other options, Dorian repeated slowly, the full implication sinking in. You mean she planted you here to sabotage my wedding? Not sabotage, Anya said quickly. She was worried about you. She went through the same thing 5 years ago, the arranged marriage, the family pressure, the feeling of being trapped. She made her choice and lost her family. She didn't want you to go through that alone. So everything between us, all those conversations, all the connection I thought we had, that was just you following orders from my sister? The hurt in his voice was devastating. Anya felt like she was watching something precious shatter in slow motion. No, she said desperately. At first, maybe I was more aware of you because of what Simone had told me. But everything that developed between us, that was real. My feelings for you are real. How can I believe that? Dorian asked, and his voice was hollow now, empty of the warmth that had been there the night before. How can I trust anything you've said when you've been lying to me from the beginning? Because I'm telling you the truth now, Anya said, tears finally spilling over. Because last night scared me into realizing that I'm in love with you, and I can't let you make a decision about your future without knowing all the facts. What would you do if you discovered someone you trusted had been keeping secrets, but for all the right reasons? Have you ever been in a situation where the truth was more complicated than simple right and wrong? Before Dorian could respond, his office door opened and Marcus walked in, his expression grim. Dorian, we have a problem, he announced, not noticing the emotional devastation playing out in front of him. The Vance family just received some very interesting information about your secretary's background. Information they're threatening to make public if you don't sign that contract immediately. The trap was closing from all sides. The information Marcus carried felt like a loaded weapon as he placed a manila folder on Dorian's desk. The Vance family hired a private investigator, Marcus explained, his lawyer's voice carefully neutral. They wanted to ensure there were no surprises before the wedding. What they found about your secretary is interesting. Dorian's blood ran cold. Beside him, Anya had gone completely pale, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. What kind of information? Dorian asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Marcus opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a detailed background report. Financial records showing payments from Simone Ashford to Anya Collins. Phone records documenting regular contact between them over the past 6 months. Evidence that Miss Collins was specifically placed in this position to influence your decision about the engagement. That's not, Anya started, but Marcus cut her off. There's more. Hotel records showing that Miss Collins met with your sister the night before her job interview. Email exchanges discussing your emotional state and strategies for helping you see alternatives to the family plan. The Vances are calling it corporate espionage. Dorian felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. Not because he was surprised by Simone's involvement. Anya had just confessed that part. But because he realized this was about to become a weapon used against all of them. What do the Vances want? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. They want the contract signed immediately, Marcus said. Before noon today. They're threatening to release this information to the business press, along with speculation about corporate security breaches and questions about your fitness to lead Mallory Industries. They're suggesting that if you can be manipulated by a secretary, Perhaps you're not ready to handle the responsibilities of a merger this significant. It was brilliant, ruthless strategy. The Vances weren't just threatening personal embarrassment. They were attacking his professional credibility, his business judgment, his very identity as a leader. And if I sign the contract, the information disappears. The wedding proceeds as planned. Everyone pretends none of this ever happened. Anya was staring at the folder like it contained a bomb that was about to explode. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered. I never wanted to put you in this position. But you did put me in this position, Dorian said, and his voice was colder than he'd intended. The betrayal was still too fresh, the manipulation too raw. Both you and Simone decided to interfere in my life without my knowledge or consent. We were trying to help. By lying to me for months, the hurt in his voice silenced her. Marcus, recognizing a family drama when he saw one, excused himself. I'll give you 10 minutes to decide, he said. But Dorian, you need to understand. If this information goes public, it won't just damage your reputation. It'll destroy hers completely. After Marcus left, the office fell into heavy silence. Dorian and Anya sat across from each other, separated by more than just his desk. The trust that had been building between them lay in ruins, and neither knew how to begin rebuilding it. Tell me the truth, Dorian said finally. All of it. No more secrets. No more protecting me from information you think I can't handle. Anya took a shaky breath. Simone contacted me 3 months before I applied for this job. She'd researched my background, knew I came from a working-class family, knew I'd put myself through college, knew I had strong opinions about authenticity versus appearances. She thought I'd be someone you could relate to. Someone who could manipulate me, you mean. Someone who could remind you that there were other ways to live, Anya corrected. She wasn't trying to manipulate you into any specific decision. She just wanted you to remember who you were before all this pressure started. And what was your role in this plan? To be genuinely myself. To do my job well. To treat you like a person instead of a title. And to be honest about my own background and values. The connection between us, that wasn't planned. That scared both of us. Dorian studied her face, trying to separate truth from manipulation, genuine emotion from skillful performance. How do I know you're not still following her script? Because I'm about to tell you something that goes against everything Simone wanted me to do, Anya said, meeting his eyes directly. I think you should sign that contract. The words hit him like a physical shock. What? Sign it. Marry Celeste. Give your family what they want. I don't understand. Last night you were encouraging me to stop playing by their rules. That was before I realized how much damage my presence in your life has caused, Anya said, tears starting to fall again. If you don't sign that contract, you'll lose your family, your business relationships, and your reputation. All because of decisions I made that you never knew about. And if I do sign it, you get to keep everything that matters in your world. Your father's respect, your company's stability, your position in society. You get the life you were born for. What about what I want? Sometimes what we want isn't what's best for us. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you care about is willing to sacrifice their own happiness for what they think is your greater good? Where someone is prepared to walk away from something real because they believe it's the right thing to do. Dorian stood up and walked to his office window, staring down at the city where he'd built his empire. 47 floors below, people were living their ordinary lives, commuting to jobs they might not love, making compromises they might not want, following paths chosen by circumstance rather than passion. You know what the worst part of all this is? He said without turning around. It's not that you and Simone conspired behind my back. It's not even that the Vances are using it as leverage. It's that everyone in my life, my father, Celeste, the Vances, even you and Simone, everyone thinks they know what's best for me better than I do. That's not true, isn't it? He turned to face her. My father thinks I should marry for business advantage. Celeste thinks I should be grateful for a strategic partnership. The Vances think I'm too weak to make my own decisions. Simone thinks I need to be saved from my family. And you think I should sacrifice what I want to protect everyone else from the consequences of your choices. Dorian, when does anyone ask what I think? When does anyone trust me to make my own decisions and live with the results? The question hung in the air, loaded with years of frustrated independence and suppressed autonomy. What do you think? Anya asked quietly. What do you want to do? It was such a simple question, but it cut through all the manipulation and pressure and expectations to the core of who he really was. I think, Dorian said slowly, that I'm done living my life according to other people's plans. I think I'm tired of making decisions based on what's safe instead of what's right. And I think that if I sign that contract, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering who I could have been if I'd had the courage to find out. He walked back to his desk and picked up the marriage contract. 47 pages of his predetermined future, written by lawyers and approved by families who measured success by power accumulated rather than happiness achieved. The Vances want this signed by noon, he said, looking at his watch. It was 11:30. What are you going to do? Dorian looked at Anya, really looked at her. The woman who had lied to him and manipulated him and cared about him enough to tell him to choose security over love. The woman who represented everything his family would never understand or accept. The woman who had reminded him that there were other ways to live, other definitions of success, other possibilities for his future. I'm going to do something that's going to shock everyone, he said. He picked up his phone and called his father. Dad, I need you to come to my office immediately. And bring Celeste and her parents. There's something I need to tell all of you. What's this about, son? It's about the contract. It's about the wedding. It's about the rest of my life. 20 minutes later, his office was filled with the most powerful people in his world. His father, Everett, Celeste and her parents, Carlton and Victoria Vance, Marcus, and various other family members and advisors. They filled the space with expensive suits and even more expensive expectations. The marriage contract sat in the center of his desk like the focal point of a war council. Well, Everett said impatiently. Marcus said there was some urgency about signing this today. Dorian looked around the room at all the faces watching him expectantly. Then he looked at Anya, who was standing quietly by the window, prepared to witness the destruction of everything she'd inadvertently helped him discover about himself. There is urgency, Dorian said, but not the kind you're expecting. He picked up the contract and, in front of everyone who had spent months planning his future, tore it cleanly in half. The silence that followed the tearing of the contract was deafening. For a moment, nobody moved. The two halves of the document lay on Dorian's desk like the remains of a demolished bridge, and everyone in the room stared at them as if they couldn't quite process what they were seeing. Everett was the first to speak, his voice low and dangerous. What have you done? I've made a choice, Dorian replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he'd just set in motion. My choice. Carlton Vance's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You just destroyed a $50 billion alliance over what? A secretary? I destroyed a contract that would have destroyed me, Dorian corrected. The fact that you can't see the difference says everything about why this marriage was wrong from the beginning. Celeste, to her credit, looked more relieved than angry. Thank God, she said quietly, surprising everyone. I was wondering how long we were both going to pretend this was what either of us wanted. Her parents turned to stare at her in shock, but she continued with newfound boldness. Did anyone actually ask if I wanted to marry someone who clearly had feelings for someone else? Did anyone consider that I might want to choose my own husband? Victoria Vance looked scandalized. Celeste, this is not the time. Actually, Mother, this is exactly the time. If Dorian has the courage to choose authenticity over obligation, maybe I should too. The room erupted in voices, angry, confused, desperate. Everett was shouting about family honor and business consequences. Carlton was threatening lawsuits and media exposure. Various relatives and advisors were offering contradictory advice and recriminations. Through it all, Dorian remained calm. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe clearly. Everyone, please, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. The room gradually quieted. I understand you're upset. I understand there will be consequences. But I need you to understand something too. I'm not the same man who agreed to this arrangement 6 months ago. You're making a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life, Everett said, his voice cold with fury. Maybe, Dorian admitted. But it will be my mistake to make and my life to live with the consequences. The confrontation lasted another hour, filled with ultimatums, threats, and desperate attempts to change his mind. In the end, the Vances stormed out, promising legal action and social ostracism. Several family members followed, shaking their heads in disgust at his selfishness and reckless disregard for family obligations. When the office finally cleared, only 3 people remained, Dorian, Anya, and his father. Everett sat heavily in one of the leather chairs, looking older than Dorian had ever seen him. You realize what you've given up, he said quietly. I realize what I've chosen instead, Dorian replied. The business relationships alone. will recover or they won't. But I'll build new ones based on merit rather than marriage contracts. Everett studied his son for a long moment. You really think she's worth all this? He asked, nodding toward Anya. This isn't about her, Dorian said firmly. This is about me remembering who I am when I'm not trying to live up to everyone else's expectations. His father stood slowly, straightening his tie with the careful precision of a man trying to maintain dignity in defeat. Your trust fund will be frozen by tomorrow. The family lawyers will be in touch about separating your personal assets from family holdings. Don't expect support from the family business network. I understand. Do you? Do you really understand what it means to walk away from everything your family has built? Dorian looked around his office, the corner office with the harbor view, the mahogany desk that had belonged to 3 generations of Mallory men, the oil paintings of ancestors who had built their empire through strategic alliances and calculated marriages. I understand that none of this means anything if I lose myself in the process of maintaining it. Everett paused at the door. I hope you're right, son. For your sake, I hope you're right. After he left, Dorian and Anya were alone with the aftermath of the most dramatic decision either of them had ever witnessed. I can't believe you actually did it, Anya said, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and terror. I can't believe it took me so long. They stood facing each other across the office that would soon no longer be his, both of them processing the reality of what had just happened. What happens now? Anya asked. Now we figure out what comes next. Dorian moved closer to her, close enough to take her hands in his. I meant what I said last night. About this being worth the risk. About you being worth the risk. Even after learning that I lied to you? Even after realizing that Simone and I manipulated the situation. You didn't manipulate my feelings, Dorian said. You didn't manufacture the connection between us or fake the conversations that made me remember who I used to be. Yes, the circumstances that brought us together were arranged. But what developed between us was real. How can you be sure? Because I just gave up everything I was supposed to want, and I've never felt more certain about a decision in my life. Have you ever had a moment where losing everything you thought mattered helped you discover what actually matters? Where stripping away all the external expectations revealed who you really are underneath? Over the following weeks, the transformation was both dramatic and gradual. The media coverage was intense but short-lived. Billionaire heir abandons dynasty for secretary love dominated headlines for a few days, but other scandals quickly replaced their story in the public attention span. The business consequences were significant, but not catastrophic. Several major contracts were canceled, and some longtime partners distanced themselves from Dorian's companies. But others, particularly those who had respected his independent business success, remained loyal. New partnerships emerged with companies that valued innovation over tradition. Dorian moved out of his penthouse and into a smaller, but more comfortable apartment that felt like home rather than a showcase. He sold several of his luxury possessions, discovering that he didn't miss most of them. Anya resigned from her position as his secretary, not because she was fired or because their relationship made it inappropriate, but because she wanted to pursue her own career goals rather than being defined by her connection to him. I need to know that I can succeed on my own terms too, she explained. Just like you're learning to succeed on yours. She found a position with a nonprofit organization focused on financial literacy education, using her business skills to help working-class families build wealth and independence. The work paid less than half what she'd earned at Mallory Industries, but she'd never been happier. Their relationship developed slowly, built on genuine friendship and mutual respect rather than the intense drama of their initial connection. They spent evenings talking about books, taking long walks through the city, cooking meals together in his much smaller kitchen. They learned each other's habits, preferences, fears, and dreams without the pressure of family expectations or professional boundaries. They discovered that the attraction between them was even stronger when it wasn't forbidden or complicated by deception. Most surprisingly to both of them, they found that they worked well as partners in ways that went beyond romance. Anya's insights helped Dorian reshape his business practices to be more ethical and sustainable. His resources and connections helped her nonprofit expand its reach and impact. 6 months after the contract-tearing incident, they had built something neither had expected. A partnership based on equality, authenticity, and shared values rather than convenience or rebellion. And slowly, carefully, some bridges began to be rebuilt. 2 years after the day Dorian tore up his marriage contract, he stood in the same Harborview office. not as the heir to a family empire, but as the CEO of his own company, built from the ground up on principles he'd chosen rather than inherited. The office was smaller than his previous one, but the view was just as spectacular. More importantly, it felt like his. Every decision that had shaped the space, every partnership that had built the business, every policy that governed how they treated employees. All of it reflected his authentic values rather than family tradition. Mallory Independent Ventures had become one of New Avalon's most respected mid-sized companies, known for innovative business solutions and ethical practices that other corporations were beginning to emulate. They'd proven that success didn't require sacrificing integrity, that profit and principles could coexist, that building wealth didn't have to mean abandoning the values that defined you as a person. The morning papers were spread across his desk, featuring a story that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. Former Dynasty heir partners with Family Foundation on educational initiative. The reconciliation with his family had been gradual, measured in small steps rather than dramatic gestures. It started when Simone reached out 6 months after the wedding scandal, not to apologize exactly, but to acknowledge that her plan had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. "I wanted to save you from making the same mistake I did," she'd said over coffee at a neutral location downtown. "I never expected you to find the courage I couldn't find." Everett had been the holdout, his pride wounded by what he saw as public humiliation and business betrayal. But eventually, his respect for Dorian's independent success began to outweigh his anger over family disobedience. The turning point came when Dorian's company landed a major government contract that even the traditional family business had been unable to secure. "Maybe," Everett had admitted grudgingly during their first private dinner in 18 months, "you know something about building relationships that the rest of us forgot along the way." The conversation that followed was honest in ways their relationship had never been before. Everett shared his own regrets about sacrificing personal happiness for family expectations, his fear that the Mallory legacy would end with his generation, his struggle to understand how love and business success could coexist. "I spent so many years protecting what my father built," he'd said, "that I forgot to ask whether it was worth protecting." For his part, Dorian had been able to explain his choice without anger for the first time. "I wasn't rejecting the family or the business principles that made us successful. I was rejecting the idea that I had to become someone else to maintain those things." Their relationship would never be what it might have been if Dorian had followed the traditional path, but it had become something more honest and ultimately more meaningful. The real transformation, though, had been in Dorian and Anya themselves. Anya had thrived in her nonprofit work, building programs that helped thousands of families understand financial planning, debt management, and wealth building. Her background in both worlds, working-class struggle and corporate success, gave her unique insights that made her programs more effective than traditional financial education initiatives. She'd also discovered talents she'd never known she possessed. Her ability to translate complex financial concepts into accessible language led to speaking engagements, then consulting work, then a book deal for a guide to financial independence written specifically for working families. "You know what's funny?" she'd told Dorian recently as they walked along the harbor where his family's empire had first taken root. "I spent so much of my life trying to escape my background, but it turned out to be my greatest professional asset." Their relationship had evolved from desperate attraction to genuine partnership. They'd learned to navigate the challenges of building a life together without losing their individual identities. They'd discovered that love wasn't just about finding someone who completed you, but about finding someone who inspired you to become the fullest version of yourself. They'd also learned that choosing authenticity over expectation was an ongoing process, not a one-time decision. Every day brought new opportunities to choose the easy path of conformity or the harder path of integrity. But perhaps the most significant change was in how their story had affected others. The tale of the billionaire who gave up his arranged marriage for genuine love had resonated far beyond New Avalon's social circles. It had become a symbol for anyone struggling with family expectations, professional pressure, or the gap between who they were expected to be and who they actually wanted to become. Dorian regularly received letters from young people facing pressure to enter family businesses they hated, from women being pushed into marriages they didn't want, from men who felt trapped by traditional definitions of success. He'd started speaking at universities and business schools, sharing his story not as a romance, but as a case study in authentic leadership. "The hardest part," he would tell audiences, wasn't giving up the money or the status or even the family approval. The hardest part was trusting that I could build something meaningful without following someone else's blueprint. The deeper lesson of their story wasn't about love conquering all. It was about the courage required to define success on your own terms. In a world that constantly pressures people to choose security over authenticity, convenience over conscience, tradition over innovation, Dorian and Anya had proven that alternative paths were possible. They'd shown that walking away from what you're supposed to want could lead to discovering what you actually need. Their story had become proof that sometimes the person who changes your life forever isn't the one you expect. And sometimes freedom requires saying goodbye to the life everyone else planned for you. Most importantly, they'd learned that real success, the kind that lets you sleep peacefully at night and look at yourself honestly in the mirror, comes not from meeting other people's expectations, but from having the courage to exceed your own. The fairy tale ending wasn't about living happily ever after in a castle built by previous generations. It was about building something new together, brick by brick, choice by authentic choice, creating a foundation strong enough to support not just their own dreams, but the dreams of everyone who would see their story and dare to believe that they, too, could choose courage over comfort. Today, if you walk through the marble lobbies of New Avalon's financial district, you'll still hear people tell the story of the billionaire who kissed his secretary, not just to escape an arranged marriage, but to find his way back to himself. But here's what makes this story truly powerful. It's not really about billionaires or arranged marriages or corporate dynasties. It's about something much more universal and much more urgent. It's about the moment when you realize that the life everyone else has planned for you isn't the life you want to live. It's about the courage to disappoint people who claim to love you but can't accept who you really are. It's about discovering that the person who changes everything might be standing right next to you, waiting for you to see them clearly. Most importantly, it's about learning that freedom isn't something you inherit or purchase. It's something you choose again and again every day. Dorian and Anya's story reminds us that sometimes the biggest risk isn't losing what you have, but never discovering what you could become. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't a knight in shining armor, but someone who believes in your strength enough to let you save yourself. Their love story became legendary not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was easy, but because they chose to fight for it. Not because it followed the rules, but because they had the courage to write their own. In a world that constantly tells us to settle for security over satisfaction, to choose what's practical over what's passionate, to accept the paths laid out by others instead of forging our own, their story is a reminder that alternatives exist. The question isn't whether you'll face pressure to conform, to settle, to accept a life that looks successful from the outside but feels empty from the inside. The question is what you'll do when that pressure comes. Will you have the courage to kiss your old life goodbye? Will you trust that the person who sees your authentic self is worth more than 1,000 people who only love your image? Will you choose to build something new rather than maintain something inherited? If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think about your own choices, your own courage, your own possibilities, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because soul-igniting stories is about more than entertainment. It's about finding the inspiration to write your own story of authentic success. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they don't have to accept the life others have planned for them. Comment below with your own story of choosing authenticity over expectation. Your courage might inspire someone else to find their own. Your authentic life is waiting. The only question is, are you brave enough to claim it? Remember, the best love stories aren't about finding someone to complete you. They're about finding someone who inspires you to become completely yourself.